Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Classic Comics. As the comic industry continues to flounder, comic pros are increasingly voicing concerns on social media about how bad the industry is getting, after years of insisting that everything is fine. Recently, however, we've seen several comic pros on social media expressing different sentiments about the industry, about how difficult it's become to sell your ideas, how difficult it is to get book deals, how difficult it is to get paid on time or get paid at all. And now many of these left wing comic pros are finally sounding the alarm and saying that things are bad and things need to change. Now, my first thoughts when I started seeing this sort of thing was, aha, sales are finally getting bad enough that even these SJW comic pros can't pretend everything is fine anymore. But as I was preparing to make this video, I had an epiphany of sorts, and now I think it's really something else. After all, this current crop of comic pros has never cared about sales before, so why now? And I think I may have the answer. It's no big secret that these comic creators these days are always angling for the Hollywood deal, trying to get a comic they created turned into a streaming show. But Hollywood money is drying up. That's what changed. Hollywood is broke now too. And there have been multiple stories in the media of how Hollywood is cutting back, cutting costs, reducing content, and reducing the number of streaming shows because streaming has never been profitable. It never has. They're broke, and now that pipeline that a lot of these SJWs in comics thought they were going to ride out of comics and into Hollywood is drying up. And they're starting to realize, oh shit, there ain't going to be no Netflix deal for me. And they're starting to panic. They're stuck in comics now, and they're going to have to try and survive in an industry that they have completely wrecked. Deliberately. Deliberately, mind you. They set the house on fire and then thought that they would just walk out the door and go to Hollywood, and now they're realizing the door is locked. They can't get out, but the house is already on fire and burning down around them. And now they're really starting to crap their pants because the industry is in a dire state thanks to them, and they can't make a living. But they have no choice. It's either stay in comics and try to survive, or I don't know. These people are so minimally talented, maybe they'll go flip burgers. But there's no Netflix deal in their future, and suddenly the health of the industry matters. And meanwhile, comic shops just continue to go out of business. The latest is JHU, aka Jim Hanley's Universe, a comic shop in Manhattan that has recently announced that it's going to shut its doors. And there's an article here on Bleeding Cool that reports on it. Bleeding Cool has received notice that JHU Comics will be closing its Manhattan store at the end of September. This consolidation is down to rising costs, and the company has decided that the best way to continue to serve comic book readers is to focus on the operations of the flagship location located at 299 New Dorp Lane, Staten Island. What a name for a road, Dorp Lane. And will continue to operate the web store, online subscriptions, eBay, live social media, video auctions, Comic Con attendance, and more. Jim Handley's Universe was one of the most famous comic shops in the world, located opposite the Empire State Building in New York City, and in Staten Island since the mid 80s. They say that thanks to the patronage of all the JHU loyal customers, they were able to continue their livelihood and provide for their families for the past 10 years. A decade is a long time for any small business to survive in Manhattan, and JHU thanks everyone for their many years of patronage. JHU Comic Books hopes to see you again at our Staten Island store in the future, just 1 hour away from Manhattan. So you can still get your comics, you just have to travel an hour there to get them and then an hour back. Okay, so basically so figure close to 3 hour trip to get your comics. Okay, sure. So Mark Miller has responded to this and here's the original tweet here where they talk about the closing, and then Mark Miller put a tweet up in response. Here it is. He says, Jim Handley's store in New York is closing. Unthinkable news, and surely to God a wake up call to the big two. Marvel, DC, and all the US indie companies added together are now 9% of the American domestic market. How does this happen when the characters are more famous than ever? And he continues, cut to the usual suspect saying everything is fine, but look at the shelf space in Barnes& and Noble. Talk to your retailer about cuts he's making. A strong Marvel and DC are urgently required again for the health of the industry. This is an iceberg tip. And someone responded, the big two in US indies make up 9% of US comic sales. What are the rest? And Miller responded, 79% manga. The rest mostly Dogman. I love Dogman, I love manga, but the complete collapse of the American industry is as devastating as the collapse of the British industry in the 90s for hundreds of American writers and artists. And as Miller noted, there are certain parties who are going to continue to insist that everything is fine and there's nothing to worry about. But the decline of the comic industry is becoming increasingly difficult to deny. And in recent months, some comic pros are starting to admit, not directly necessarily, but indirectly, admit by complaining about how they can't get work and how their pay is so low they can't survive on what comics pay them. And it's becoming more frequent. We had that hashtag comics broke me thing trending for a while. And it's not just this store. There are other comic shops that are closing. Here we have a tweet from the owners of Flying Colors Comics. Flying Colors Comics is the comic shop that invented Free Comic Book Day. And apparently they put out this tweet recently where they hint heavily that they're going to go out of business. And you have multiple articles talking about comic book pros, how they can't make a living, how bad the industry is gotten, and how they can't get work and they can't get paid. And one of the most prominent SJW comic book pros is Gail Simone, who wrote for years at DC. She was actually pretty decent for a while, but she's one of the early adopters of wokeness in her writing. And she's one of the comic pros who's dismissed concerns and complaints about the direction comics have taken for years. But now she's starting to sing a different tune. In a Facebook group, she recently laid out what her complaints are about the comic industry, and what she says is interesting, since her complaints aren't much different than what many comic fans have been saying for years, and they were criticized, attacked, and canceled by SJWs in the comic biz, i.e., people like Gail, for years for their trouble. So let's take a look at this. Gail Simone's top 5 pet peeves of comics offer a stern warning to a failing industry. Increasingly, the comic industry is seeing professionals, retailers, and fans grumble about the collapse of mainstream comics. From Mark Miller talking on Thinking Critical to IDW posting record losses, almost everyone has an opinion, including Gail Simone, who talked about her 5 biggest pet peeves of the industry in a Facebook group this week. So, not making sure veteran pros have work if they want it. The comic industry is notorious for ageism being one of its worst problems. Even Grant Morrison has lamented that he's aged out of being able to write for mainstream comics in recent years. Mark Miller has also suggested, in order to generate hype for storylines, bringing back seasoned veterans with followings is a crucial thing Marvel and DC have to do. For now, veteran artists find better places in independent homes like Comicsgate than they do finding work for these publishers. Yeah, I mean she's talking about how well they need to get more work for veterans. Okay, well, how many veterans have been driven out of the industry by people like Gail because she doesn't like their political views, doesn't like who they vote for? People like Ethan Van Sciver, people like Chuck Dixon, people like Shane Davis and the other folks involved with Comicsgate. These are talented people who could sell comics, but they don't have a place in comics anymore because the people who run comics don't like them. 2. Not respecting the stories that came before. This is probably the most controversial of Simone's opinions listed, as it's been the reason so many have been canceled and labeled bigots by the extreme left in the industry. Much of the lack of respect for the characters comes from replacing characters with race and gender swapped counterparts and forcing beloved characters to be mired with LGBTQ fetishes. These changes have ruined multiple characters, and reviewers such as Richard C. Meyer have come under savage attacks for stating much of this same point. Yeah, I mean, not respecting the storylines that came before. That's what modern comics are all about. It's all about trashing what came before. And again, Simone's never voiced any problem with any of this before and was perfectly happy to attack people who did. 3. Not allowing the artist room to contribute. Increasingly, the big companies have been outsourcing their work to foreign studios on the art. This has trained writers to be very specific in what they want because, with English as a second language, they can't risk an artist taking liberties. When working with a competent artist who understands comics, however, a good artist can bring a lot to a comic script if allowed breathing room. 4. Price point. Many comics on the shelves are now showing introductory prices of $4.99, $5.99, or even $7.99 in the case of Ultimate Invasion number 1. This increasingly makes it difficult for a reader to check something interesting off of the stands because it makes the amount more than an impulse buy. If anything, number 1 issues should be discounted in order to try to get readers on for a story. Otherwise, why wouldn't they wait for trade or go find a cheaper form of entertainment? Alterna Comics has done wonders in this regard by using newsprint to create cheap entry points for readers on their books, like King Cryptid by Peter Samedi. 5. Lack of distribution options. This speaks to both the physical and digital media. For physical, comics have been relegated to comic shops for years, making it a place where someone has to know they want comics to go. They used to be in places like grocery stores, gas stations, and places where people could simply find books. Online is no better, as Amazon offers about the only viable digital option off of the direct platforms of the companies themselves. Comic companies need to open up other avenues and stop being so myopic. Overall, Simone made good points with her pet peeves, and all of these could be thought of as warnings to the comic industry as a whole that they are in trouble and they need to up their game in several regards if they want to remain viable into the next decade and beyond. So the thing is, most of these complaints aren't much different than what fans have been saying for years, with the exception of the not allowing artists to contribute point, I think. But the rest of this stuff is pretty standard in terms of what fans and YouTubers have been complaining about for years. Prices are out of control. Too many creators are hacks with a little talent who are hired because they work dirt cheap or tick the right diversity box. And they don't treat characters and their history with any respect, and these SJW creator types that dominate comics now just want to twist and distort these characters into whatever they want the character to be, regardless of what they've been for generations. Even as recently as last year, if you were a fan and you said some of these things, the same people complaining now would have attacked you as a bigot or as a member of the alt-right or whatever. So it's a bit funny to see Gail, who is again one of the original SJW comic pros, saying similar things. But of course, it's all right if she says it, I guess. Welcome to the alt-right pipeline, Gail. Be better, please. As someone who cares, just discard this hatred you're spewing and be better, Gail. So, do you agree with Gail's list of problems, or do you think she's missed some things? If so, what should she have included in her list? Let me know in the comments, and also please like this video and sub to the channel. And while you're here, please do check out some of my other videos, and I'll see you all next time. Thanks for watching.